Well, the way I understand innovation and creativity is that these are actually naturally occurring human phenomena, which, if we can understand a little bit of the how-tos involved in successfully being innovative and being creative, we should be then able to utilize our own God-given gifts to greater effect as individuals. And if we can do it as individuals, we can do it as members of teams, because all teams ultimately are made up of individuals. So if I learn something about what enables me to be more innovative, what enables me to be more creative, I'm actually potentially learning how I can be a more effective, innovative and creative team leader. Now, multiply that over many, many teams, and you have, if it's a large organization, potentially something that is highly significant, which is an increasingly innovative and increasingly creative organization. So there is this rather important element, as it seems to me, which is, while there's been a lot of talk and a lot of research into, for instance, the innovative organization. Okay, that's great. But at the end of the day, what most people need is to know, well, what do I need to do to be able to be more innovative? The organization, okay, but what do I need to do? What do I need to do to be more innovative? And that takes us into how-tos, which takes us into an understanding of human processing. So for me, part of the journey has been in understanding human processing, looking at what do we have by way of explanatory models. But ultimately, I'm less interested in perhaps explanations than how-tos. Because if I can offer people some tool that enables them to function more effectively, I can test whether it really does that or not. And if it does, then we can increase performance. Then we can get curious about, I wonder how this works. That, to me, that is secondary. Now, I'm aware that's a very pragmatic approach. It's not an academic approach, certainly, and that's why I'm not an academic. But it does mean that if you're curious about your own way of functioning, what I'm talking about will make sense to you, and I think will also engage you, because you get to be your own best subject of study. So there are some really potentially very useful things here about, when have I been really innovative? What did I do? How did I do it? And similarly, when have I really not been very innovative? Because if I'm able to engage in that basic contrastive analysis, I could potentially highlight some of the things that make a difference. And we can. So, for instance, if I wanted to offer pretty much anybody one tool for being more innovative, I would say, be less judgmental. Why? I'm not saying don't have an opinion, but being judgmental frequently forecloses optional thinking. And if I wanted to offer people a tool for being more innovative, I'd say, begin to explore alternative perspectives. Can you see the same situation from different points of view? That is a skill. It's a learnable skill, and a great many people lack it. Which means that they get boxed into, this is the way because this is my way, and my way is the way, and my way is the world. And I'm sorry, there's just something wrong with you. Now, ultimately, that can prove terminal if you get cultures at war with each other. But in less charged situations, it prevents creativity. It prevents being able to think of new possibilities, to see things from different angles. So, for instance, one example I sometimes use is, there was a very interesting conundrum, really, that faced US forces as they were involved in island hopping in the Second World War as they made their way back towards Japan. They had a particular island which they really needed as a strategic base, and they needed to be able to have some kind of airstrip there to land on, but this was a very mountainous terrain. Okay, but you've got to create some sort of airstrip. Well, how are you going to do that? Because when you look at it, you look at a map of it, there is no flat place. Now, I've actually run this as an experiment with people in varieties of different industries to say, okay, here's your remit. You have to create an airstrip. And here's your map, here's the geography, here's the terrain, go ahead. And people are frequently baffled. And the reason they're baffled is because they take the conditions as presented as being the only way of seeing what's there. Now, here we have a real life example, and what actually happened was that upon closer examination, the military realized that there was a beach area that was really quite flat, except it happened to be underwater. So what do? You create an airstrip by draining the water out. Suddenly, the entire proposition is completely different. Where there was an impossible remit, now you've got something that's, well, that's quite manageable. Now we're into a question of engineering. How do we remove the water? But if we can do that, it's, you know, it's a bay, it's possible. We now have our runway. But you don't get to create that runway if you cannot think around the problem. So you have to think differently. And frequently what that really comes down to is reframing. So what we're really often needing to do here is take whatever the parameters are that we've been offered and look at them differently. Now there's a whole literature on reframing. I think NLP actually has a lot to offer when it comes to understanding how to do that. How do you change the way you think about an issue? Because it's not just a mindset. It frequently involves some change in emotional disposition as well. For instance, suppose you have somebody who is just very difficult to work with. You may find them irritating, you may find them threatening. I can think of many, many times when I'm working with people coaching where to be able to give them a way of seeing somebody who is threatening in some way, difficult in whatever way, and to change their perspective on that person is to empower them. Now, it's not just, well, try and imagine it differently. I mean, whenever I hear the word try, I know that there's some effort involved. At least in English, the word try suggests oh, yes, try and be happy. It's like, what? Or try and relax. It's a preposterous suggestion. Try suggests that it's hard work. But if we can offer people an easy way, then there's no effort, but there is a possible change. And there are very specific techniques for instance, working with people so that you have a different way of engaging with the difficult people in your life. That is absolutely about reframing. And, at the most mundane level, when I moved house, one of the paintings that I had had for many years, which was a Mondrian in fact, the frame got broken. And it had been in a fairly traditional frame. And I loved this particular painting and I wanted to put it up back on the wall, so I needed to put it in a new frame, which I duly did. But I chose a completely different kind of frame. I chose a very thin red frame all the way around. This is extraordinary. It's the same painting, but I saw it differently. Why? Because I had literally reframed it, So this kind of thing, it's really fundamental, and it's quite easy if you know how. And very often people don't know how, and very often they're not used to thinking in this way. Because this way of thinking is not about the content, it's about the structure of how we engage with our experience. If we engage differently with it, we have new options. Well, I think there are many. One that is, I think, really very important is there is an endless balancing act between being stimulated to create or being understimulated, so why bother, or being so stimulated that you go into paralysis. Now, that's a continuum. And so part of the art of being innovative is to find your balance point there. And that requires not just thinking, it requires a kind of emotional, internal self-calibration. Am I appropriately stimulated? In which case, now what helps me be more innovative when I am appropriately stimulated? Now, in my case, for instance, if I have an issue and I can't think, how am I going to deal with this? I will very often go out for a walk. Why do I do that? Because the Chinese have an interesting expression. They talk about moving the blood. And there is an element of literally moving the blood, the oxygenation of the brain that happens, good idea. But there's something about changing your state which is fundamental to being innovative. Do you know what state you would best be in to be at your most innovative? That's a question that I often ask people, and generally speaking, people have no idea because they don't think in those terms. So for me, if I'm faced with a challenge, one of the things I will do at the outset is ask myself, what state do I need to be in so that I could respond with most of what I've got as much as possible? And that can take many forms, but it absolutely has a physical dimension. Now, in the same way, I may want to stack the cards in my favor by making a choice about when I engage in the process of being innovative. So for me, it varies for different people. But for me, I know if I want to make it hard for me to be innovative, I should make sure that I don't have too much sleep, make sure that I've got too many things that are on my radar screen at the same time, my attention is fragmented, make sure that I haven't eaten enough so my blood sugar is down, and preferably I could be dehydrated as well. Then I know I'm going to underperform. Okay, reverse all of that. What have we got? I want to make sure I've had a decent night's sleep, I'm rested, I'm refreshed, I'm etc., etc. I'm at my best. Well, what is it to be at your best? If you don't know that, you don't really know how to make the most of what you've got. If you don't think it matters that much, then I think you're just wrong. You're kidding yourself. And very often, I think when I'm coaching people and this kind of stuff comes up, I feel as though what I'm doing is getting people to inquire within. It's like they already have the answers, they just haven't seen that data as particularly important. The data is out there somewhere. I have a deadline, I must meet this deadline. Yes, okay, the deadline may be externally imposed, but how you engage with it is an internal choice. For a couple of years now, I've been working with a large multinational who have got larger in the time I've been working with them. And that's how I started, because they were growing at a very rapid pace, and they knew that their rate of growth meant that they just wouldn't have enough leaders unless they did something about it. They had to be proactive. So the brief that we agreed was that what I was going to be about was first helping identify who those leaders might be, and then working with them to develop their own leadership potential. Now, we did that in a very systematic fashion, and we did it virtually because those leaders were geographically very widely dispersed, and they were often in places that were not easy to get at as well. So the idea that I could send some of my team to go and meet face to face with them really wasn't practical. And so we had to do something else. So what we actually did was we devised a phone coaching program where as long as that person could get to a phone, we'd be fine. And that was what we did consistently over a period of something like 6 months. And the net result was these people began to have a sense of, I can be proactive. I can engage with issues that arise because I didn't realize I had as many tools as I really do have. I am learning to be more of a leader, less of a manager. And I also have a fallback, which is every 2 weeks it averaged out at, I would be in touch with my coach. Now, these were people who had had no experience of coaching. And what I was saying to them was, by way of, as it were, situating what we were doing, what I see is the longer people are in the world of work, the busier they get. The busier you are, the less strategic you will be, generally speaking. And so you have this really paradoxical situation potentially where people are so busy trying to keep up with the demands of the day that they never have an opportunity to go, now, what's really important? And the function of the coaching was to do precisely that, to create that space where they go, stop, regroup, reassess. Now, what is it that I most wish to pay attention to right now and going forward? Getting clear about that has made an enormous difference. So one of the guys early on said, so is this about time management? And I said, well, sort of. The secret of all time management processes, as far as I can fathom, is that ultimately you're really learning how to prioritize. And you move from prioritizing to the next stage, which is often delegating. But if you can't prioritize, you can't time manage. Doesn't matter how elaborate the folder is, or whether it's made of plastic, whether it's made of leather, none of that matters. So here's an example of training the next generation of leaders to be leaders by learning to prioritize, by learning to step back, by learning to value thinking time as time well spent. And that is something that most people have not had as part of their training. So that you have this regular stepping back. An analogy my wife often uses, she's a coach, is that you know what it's like when you come back from holiday and you see things differently, and right, what we really need to do here is, and you get on with it. It's the same thing. Imagine that you do that on a regular basis, regular, consistent and ongoing. Then you get to be in charge of your life. If you're in charge of your life, you can actually start to demonstrate leadership. If you are demonstrating leadership, it's remarkable. You don't have to talk about it much at all. People will naturally start to gravitate towards you because leadership is a scarce resource. And when people recognize somebody has command of themselves, then they are very happy to engage with them to learn, how can I do that for me, and could you also assist me to clarify where I may be going? I think if I look to the next generation of leaders, one of the things that's really clear to me is that in order to lead effectively going forward, people will need to know how to draw out the best in others. The command and control leadership model, it'll always have a place, but I think it's an ever diminishing place, frankly. And what that therefore means is the skill set required is to know, how do I not tell people, but invite them to give me their best performance, invite them to access their own thinking and strengthen those thinking skills so that they're able to be proactive, they're able to be self-starters, they're able to collaborate. How do I do that? As a leader, in order to do that, I need to be able not to tell, but to engage with that party so that they can access the wisdom they have within. And I don't know any better way of doing that than adopting really what is a coaching approach. Because, you know, at the end of the day, what is the essence of coaching? It is being able to ask another, well, what do you think? Not just endlessly ask them questions. By all means, contribute. That's appropriate, I think. But there is a big difference between being a coach and a mentor. Very often, mentors are incredibly valuable because they have subject specialist knowledge and possibly a lifetime of experience which a mentee can draw upon in order that they can be a better attorney, a better geologist, or whatever it is. But a coach comes with something quite different, which is not subject specialist knowledge, but the capacity to say, we can find out together what you think, and if you don't know the answers, we can find out how you will best determine what those answers could be by engaging with others. So, to me, the next generation of leaders will need to have this skill set far more highly developed. And therefore, a lot of my own work has been involved in essentially distilling what coaching has been about to teach it as what I call the coach approach, which is coaching for people who have no interest in being coaches. And the coach approach is, if you understand what makes coaching work, you can use those skills without ever being a coach, but you'll be an incredibly effective manager, you'll be an inspiring team leader, and you will be a leader who draws the best out of others. And when you can do that, of course, you have the capacity to grow an organization in a way that is impossible if it's all dependent on your brilliance. You know, so to me, the next generation is going to really need to know how to do that. And part of, therefore, what I'm about is I'm teaching young leaders a coach approach, which they then make their own. But as they make it their own, they understand that they have to start by asking the other party about their perspective, what they know, what they don't know, what their thinking is. And that requires something magical to happen. They have to do two things. They have to listen. What a concept. And they have to engage in conversation. And what I see a lot of is people actually not engaging in conversation. They're frequently making presentations to each other, back and forth, you know. There's not really a conversation taking place. And, you know, as a rule of thumb, if you want to know whether a conversation is taking place, ask yourself this: am I preparing my next answer while the other person is talking? If you are, you're actually engaged in making a presentation. You are not having a conversation. Because if you're really having a conversation, you don't have to know what the answer will be that you're going to give. So you live in a place of not knowing because you are waiting to learn, where is this person coming from? And that then informs where will you go. So you are endlessly making something which every entrepreneur has to do, which is in-course correction. You are engaging with the person in real time, thinking together. And I think that's what the next generation of leaders particularly are going to have to be able to do. It's a skill, it's a learnable skill. A lot of people need to learn it. But it's really quite easy. And part of what makes it easier is when you can relax. And what I see a lot of is people having various forms of performance anxiety. You know, I need to know what I'm going to say next. How's this going to look? What will they be thinking of me? And so forth. Rather than just turn up, be present, and allow this other person to turn up and be present. Then you could have a real collaboration. You could have a real conversation. And out of that could come unimaginable innovation.